What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I am the King Koopa. Thank you for stopping by. So we're going to be doing a full detailed review on our Alibaba welding table. This thing is an absolute unit. Gorgeous piece of equipment, and I love it. But this thing is 4 feet by 8 feet, 8-inch sides, and it is 1-inch thick cast iron. Incredibly heavy and very difficult to move around the shop, especially with my small shop. This thing was probably a little bit overkill for what I needed. But it was one of those buy once, cry once situations. Just spend the money, get it done the first time, and be done with it. So, if you're watching this video right now, most likely you're in the situation of wanting to buy a welding table. So I'm going to go through all the research that I did and kind of, I guess, help you figure out if you want to buy one or whatnot. So let's just go through all the details. I can put a table of contents down below if you want to skip ahead to a certain part. The first thing we're going to talk about is the material that the table is made out of. There's primarily two different types of materials. You have mild steel and you have cast iron. There are pros and cons to both. So first, the mild steel. The pros, it's generally going to be a lot cheaper, it's going to be lighter, and if anything happens to it, you can repair it. So that means you can weld on it, you can modify it, you can do pretty much whatever you need to that table. Now, some people do like to weld their fixtures straight to the table. If you're going to do that, I'd recommend just getting a flat piece of steel table, not one with all the fixture holes drilled. This is a fine-tuned piece of equipment, so please don't weld to it. The cons to a steel table is that weld splatter will stick to it. So that is something that you're going to have to work with over time, which may cause you to have a little bit more maintenance and upkeep on that table. A majority of the mild steel tables on the market are going to be around 3/8-inch thick plate steel. The problem with that is a lot of those are cold rolled, so they'll have a little bit of a hump to them, so they're not a perfectly flat machined surface. So whenever you do set up your frame or the legs to your table, because generally they won't come with legs, you might have to rig up some type of bolt system underneath to be able to bend and flex the table to get it perfectly flat. Moving right along to cast iron. So this thing is super heavy duty. It can handle a little bit heavier loads than a steel table would, which that does give it a little bit higher rigidity. It gets it more flatness. It rarely warps to heat. And the best pro, in my opinion, is weld splatter does not stick to it. You will get a little bit of the tiny balls, the weld splatter balls, to stick in some of the grid lines, but really you just kind of take a scribe, stick it on there, and those little splatters come right out. The cons to a cast iron table. Number one, this thing is extremely heavy. It is going to be way heavier than a steel table, which makes it incredibly difficult to move around the shop. This table that I bought also doesn't have casters on it, which that was a mistake on my part. So moving it with 2 floor jacks on each side is definitely a challenge. It takes 2 to 3 people. The other thing is money. Cast iron tables are generally more expensive to manufacture. It's more expensive to ship. These things are really heavy. And that it is cast iron, it can be a little bit brittle. So this is super thick, I'm really not worried about it. But you don't want to be dropping it off the back of the semi. You don't want to be pounding on the top with a sledgehammer. This is a fine piece of equipment, and you don't want to be messing that up. In conclusion, if you need top precision with a heavy load capacity, cast iron's the way to go. If you need something a little bit more versatile and cost conscious, so like if you don't have a whole lot of overhead for your business and stuff like that, mild steel would definitely be the way to go. The second subject we're going to talk about is the flatness. So I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier with the steel table. A lot of those 3/8-inch thick and smaller steel tables are going to be cold rolled, so it's going to have a slight hump to it. So whenever you design the frame or the legs or whatever, you're going to need some way to be able to have some risers or bolts to be able to adjust the table around to be able to get it perfectly flat. Some people might not want to mess with that. If you can buy one of the steel tables that has the internal ribbing underneath, that'll definitely help out, keep it a little bit flatter. Cast iron, this table is machined flat. So from that side of the table to this side of the table is 0.009 inches of a difference, which is, in my mind, that is basically perfectly flat. But they basically deck it. So like if you ever took a car cylinder head to a machine shop, they put it on a machine and deck the surface. So it has a spinning tool that goes across the top. and takes off a, microscopic layer, basically. That's what they pretty much did with this entire table and the sides. The next category is going to be nitride coating. This table is not nitride coated, it is raw. So that process is where they try to induce nitrogen into the top layer of the material. So it's either a coating that they spray on or they dip it into a tank. I'm not sure exactly on the process of how they do it. But some pros to that is they help with surface hardness, it helps with wear resistance, and it is corrosion protective. So if you live in a humid climate, then it might be worth it for you to get your table nitride coated so you don't have to constantly wipe this thing down and keep it from getting surface corrosion on it. My garage doesn't get a lot of humidity in it, and that was like a $400 to $500 option, so I just opted not to do that. Next up is going to be your tooling size. So there's primarily two categories for that. You have D18, which is 18 millimeters or 5/8, and then you have D28, which is going to be 28 millimeters. So if you're doing smaller stuff like automotive work or whatnot, you could go with the D18, be perfectly fine. It's a smaller size tooling. You're going to have a lot more pattern, a lot more holes to be able to adjust from. If you're doing dump trucks, heavy equipment, farm equipment, stuff like that, you probably want to go with the D28, which is going to be a lot bigger tools, a lot more clamping force, but you are going to have less holes in your table, so you're not going to have as much adjustability. But those D28 tools are also going to be a lot more expensive. There are a couple companies out there that have their own pattern layout with their own tools and stuff like that. In my personal opinion, you want to kind of stay away from that so you're not locked into always buying that company's tools. This is a standard D18 table, so pretty much any website that sells D18 tools, which is 18 millimeters or a 5/8 rod, you can buy their tools and it's going to work for this table. So this is a 5/8 steel rod I picked up from my local metal supermarket. This thing will fit right into all the holes, so I can cut this, weld on some vice grips, or whatever I want to do to be able to make my own tools. It's a universal pattern. Jeez. So let's talk about price and your table options. So on the low end of the spectrum, you have that Harbor Freight Special, the 36 by 24 inch. It's like 3/16 inch thick, little fixture table. It's about like $189 plus taxes. So if you're a little DIY guy in a small garage and just need something to get you by, perfect. That thing works out pretty okay from the reviews I've seen. I've seen a couple guys will stack 2 or 3 together to make it a little thicker, which will help with warping when you're really putting some force down on the clamps. Or I've seen some guys run 3 of them side by side to make a really long table. So that is a really good budget option to get you going. Next, in my opinion, is going to be Facebook Marketplace. So I'll put a screenshot up here. I'm not going to say the name or who it is or anything like that, but these are 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch thick cold rolled steel tables. They can do multiple sizes, they can do the sides, anything you want, but we're just going to be looking at that 4 foot by 8 foot with 8 inch sides because that is the same table I have here. And that one was roughly $3,400 with no leg options at all. And that was a 2-hour drive. That was the closest company that I could find that would do that welding table. So that's about $3,400 with a 4-hour round trip drive. Next, in my opinion, would be the Alibaba welding table. So this thing is 1 inch thick cast iron. The table itself with the legs was roughly about $1,400. And then I did get a large supply of tooling that came with it. I haven't showed that yet. I'll just put a picture up here because we're going to go over some of that in just a little bit. The tooling was about $800, and then the shipping was $1,400, and that was DDP shipping, direct duties paid, so the seller takes all responsibility with the shipping, with importing, exporting, all the duties and taxes and tariffs. So they took all that responsibility. So if you do want to order a table from overseas, make sure they're shipping it DDP, and that was direct to my front door. So with taxes, everything, the table, the tools, the shipping, taxes, it was about $3,800 for this table. So the Facebook Marketplace table, $3,400 with a round trip drive of 4 hours, no legs, no tools, nothing, was $3,400. This table, $3,800 with the tools, legs, everything, thicker cast iron table shipped to my door. So that was pretty much my options that I was weighing. It was $3,400, $3,800. It was like, you know what? Just go with the bigger expense, $3,800, and took it that route. So the next step up from that, in my opinion, is probably Fireball and Sigmund. There are some really good tables out there. I believe Sigmund's made in Germany, but you're going to be looking at around $10,000 to $20,000 for one of those tables. So most of you guys watching this video probably don't have 20K just to drop on a table, and if you did, you probably wouldn't be watching my video. You'd probably be calling Sigmund, talking to them, asking them questions, stuff like that. So that's just kind of a rough idea of the spectrum from low to high, and you can kind of figure out, what you need based off those prices. Tools. These are all the tooling that I got with my welding table, which was roughly 800 bucks. It's a good deal, maybe not, I don't know. But first glance, we have these 90-degree clamps, which I absolutely love. Right out the gate, I noticed that they kind of have like a plastic handle on there, and I was like, man, that's kind of cheesy, but these do have 4 O-rings inside here. So there's one inside the head, one in each adjustable collar for if you wanted to do height presets, and the 4th one is inside the head here of this down leg. So it is pretty adjustable. At first I thought these were kind of cheesy, but then I seen the T-handle ones like on a set of vice grips or clamps, and I was like, I think I actually prefer these a little bit better. So I like these in my opinion. We also have some clamps here that are 45-degree angles. I really wish that I would have told them to get rid of some of those, like take probably 4 of those off and make them the straight 90 clamps. I think I've only used those like one time, so really the 45-degree clamps are kind of a waste in my opinion. We also get some V positioners if you're doing metal tubing, so I was kind of a fan of that. We got a bunch of little fixtures, some 1x2s, we got some angled 90s with adjustment slots, some short angled 90s, and some flat rectangles. We got some medium height fixtures and some tall fixtures. So these things have came in handy so far, and we did get a lot of these little locking pins. So I really wish I would have bought probably at least 10 to 15 more of these locking pins. These are pretty great, come in handy, but once you have your piece laid out and you're using 10 different fixtures to hold everything in place, you run out of these little pins pretty fast. For the quality on these, I'll probably give them like an 8 out of 10. Really, the only thing I'm really taking some points off for is I had one of these and about 3 of these that had just a slight curve to them, that they were bent or a little warped, that wouldn't allow you to put 2 of these locking pins in place into this little squares to keep everything straight. So that I had to pitch like 4 of these, so that was kind of a little disappointment too. Other than that though, all these are pretty straight, pretty square. The 90s are pretty good too. So 800 bucks for these was a little expensive. I don't think I could have found a better deal online, but it's definitely a good set to get you going. So let's talk about the quality of the table. So they primarily put all their focus into the top of the table, which is primarily what's going to be used. So all the grid lines are straight, all the holes are nice and straight, nice and beveled. Everything looks really good and phenomenal. I'm pretty happy with the top. The sides of the table, I would say, is probably where they're slacking a little bit. There are a couple holes near that under structure webbing underneath that the holes weren't drilled all the way through. So I think there's probably like 8 or 9 holes across the entire table that need re-drilled so that the clamps can go in it all the way. There is just a little bit of chipping on some of the corners and a little bit of pitting on the sides. Really isn't a big deal. I'd probably take off a point because of that. I'd probably take off another point for these tools not being perfectly straight. So far, I would probably give this purchase like an 8 out of 10. So let's move on to the actual meat and potatoes of this video. Let's talk about Alibaba, the communication, making the deal, how it all happened. So let's get right into that. So Alibaba has been around for like 20 years. I don't think it's really been well known until the last couple of years, but basically Alibaba helps link overseas sellers to different overseas buyers. I don't think it had the best reputation in the beginning, but Alibaba is a relatively bigger company now. They're trying to have good relationships with buyers and sellers, so they offer trade assurance. Trade assurance is a program that Alibaba offers for free. So I bought this table, I paid Alibaba, Alibaba holds it in basically like an escrow account. Table gets shipped to me, I mark it on Alibaba saying, hey, it was received, the quality was great, I received it in time. Boom. My portion's done, now Alibaba pays the sellers. So the seller doesn't get their money until you receive your product. And if you're still worried about it, you can always pay with a credit card, which is the easiest way to get your money back in case of a fraudulent charge or anything like that. First thing I did when I was looking for a welding table, I looked for a seller that had been on Alibaba for a couple of years, and I made sure they had quite a few sales with some good reviews. There are some sellers on there that make forklifts, that make tractors, that make lathes and welding tables. I just looked for a company that strictly made welding tables. I wanted them to be specialized in it. So all they sold was welding tables, and that's when I started looking for the years on there, the best reviews, stuff like that. I found like 3 companies on there, started messaging them, asking them some questions, getting some price, just trying to figure it all out. And just be aware the time zone for Indiana is like 12 hours different. So like I would end up messaging them right before I go to bed, wait for them to wake up, get a message received, send a message, wait another 12 hours. So the process of me communicating to make this deal took like 2 weeks. But they do have translators. They do speak pretty fluent English, I would say. But the communication can have a little bit of issues. Like I'd ask like 3 questions in one message, they would respond to 1. So then I'd ask the 2 questions again in the next message, they'd respond to 1. So you got to really break it down over a lot of messages to really get your questions answered and get your point across. The next thing is put everything in writing and make sure you tell them exactly what you want. So in their pictures, they'll have like a laser engraved ruler that runs down the sides of the tables for measuring and stuff like that. I thought that was super cool. That's not included. It was like an extra $120, but I had already placed my order, didn't know about it, so I was like, well, that kind of sucks. So you have to tell them exactly what you want. If you want a metric table, if you want an SAE table, every 2 inches, however you want the spacing, everything, the legs, the casters, tell them exactly what you want and have them quote it from that. So like if you want more clamps, tell them you want X amount of clamps, because if you just say, oh, I'll take a couple clamps, they'll literally put 1 or 2 clamps on there and that's it. And I did get a couple quotes, and I was like, wow, that's a little bit higher than what I expected, and they asked me what my budget was, and I was like, oh, $3,000 or whatever. And they're like, hold on, let me go talk to my manager. Came back, knocked off a couple $100. So, that was pretty sweet too. So with the communication, just be patient, but be persistent and tell them exactly what you want. So let's talk about the shipping, which was by far the worst case scenario for this kind of a situation. So be mindful that yes, this is coming from China. It is going to take time. This is not something that's going to be super fast. Communication in the early beginnings took me like 2 weeks. 2 weeks, I placed my order. So from start, placed my order, all the way until receiving it at my door took 84 days. Yeah, so don't expect this to go fast. So 40 of those 84 days were on the sea freight. So it took 40 days for that carrier to get with all the cargo ships and everything to America. So that was one portion of it that I did not know. I figured it would take like 15 days or something like that. No, it takes about 40 days on average for them to get over here. So they use a freight forwarder. So basically the manufacturer will pay the freight forwarder to figure out the logistics to get this table from China to your door. They will ship this on a full-length semi, and it will be set up on a double pallet. So this thing's 4 feet by 8 feet. Once the pallet's on and the dimensions, it's like 8.5 feet. So this thing is super big. So if you place the order to your home address, they will most likely be sending a semi to your house address. Most semis don't have a forklift on them. So if you don't have a forklift to get it off at your house, then I would highly suggest having them keep it at the local terminal, and then you can bring your truck to go, or truck or trailer to go pick it up from the terminal where they'll have a forklift there. And if you do have a forklift and you have the short, 36-inch forks or 4 feet forks, you can pick it up from the side, no problem, but most likely in the semi it's going to be long ways. So trying to pick it up from the end is going to be a little difficult. The forklift that put it on the back of my truck had like 96-inch forks for double pallets, so it worked out really well. They might even ask you if you want a box truck with a lift gate. The problem with that is this thing is way too big and it's not going to fit on the back of a lift gate. A lot of those lift gates are rated at like 1,500 pounds or something like that. I think a couple of them go to 3,000 pounds, but still, this thing is way too big to fit on it. And if you do a lift gate option, it's going to be even more money with shipping. So this left the manufacturer. It was picked up by A&E Sea Freight. That was crossed the sea for 40 days. It was then delivered to California, which was picked up by Golden Arcus. Golden Arcus carried it from California all the way to Illinois, and then ABF Freight picked it up from Illinois to Indiana. So thankfully, ABF picked it up. It was a union company. I like ABF. Everybody was awesome. So where the problem arose with the shipping is the communications. So the freight forwarder will call you like the day before, hey, your table's getting delivered tomorrow. Whoa, okay, well, thanks for the heads up, I guess I'll just call off tomorrow. And then it didn't even show up. And I was like, okay, well, that was a waste of a day. So the freight forwarder pays A&E, A&E pays Golden Arcus, Golden Arcus pays ABF. And it just trickles down the line until it gets delivered. The problem happened is Golden Arcus did not pay ABF. So ABF at my local terminal had my table sitting on their dock, and ABF hasn't been paid yet. They're like, well, we can't deliver it because we haven't got our portion of the money. Totally understandable. So talked to the lady there. She was super nice, explained the situation, and she's like, yeah, I'm going to make some phone calls. So we spent like the next 5 days calling the freight forwarder, calling the manufacturer, sending messages out. She was calling people, just trying to get the system processed so ABF could get paid so I could pick it up. We kept just running into a bunch of dead ends where everybody was like, yeah, that's not my problem, click. So this welding table sat in my hometown at my local ABF for about 2 weeks, and finally the receptionist there, she was like, I'm just going to start charging them for storage fees. So she sent that message out to Golden Arcus like, hey, we're charging you storage fees per the day. Boom. As soon as she sent that, Golden Arcus paid up. They're like, yeah, it was our mistake. Here's your money. ABF was like, boom, come pick it up. I was like, sweet. ABF was phenomenal. A lot of good communications from them. Really happy it got delivered for them. So if I were to do this again, I would just tell them, deliver it right to the ABF freight terminal, and I'll just pick it up from there. So I wouldn't even honestly mess with shipping it to your house. I did have a buddy be like, hey, I'll give you $5 grand cash for the welding table. And it's like, yeah, that's not a bad deal. I can make a little bit of money, maybe buy another one. But honestly, I don't even want to mess with it again just because of the shipping fiasco. The company was great. The welding table's great. Shipping, atrocious. So just be mindful if you do buy a welding table from there that you're probably going to have issues with the shipping. So was the table worth it? I took off a little bit of points for some of the tools being not perfectly straight. I took off a little bit of the points for some of the holes on the sides not being fully drilled through. And I definitely took off some points for the shipping. The communication was all right. Alibaba was all right. The manufacturer was great. The quality of the table, I'm honestly pretty impressed with. The top of it looks super nice. I'm really happy with how this turned out. You know, I tell a couple buddies, hey, I bought a welding fixture table. They're like, oh, cool. And then they come and see it, and they're like, wow, you know, that is a heavy-duty table. It, like, impresses pretty much anybody that sees it. So this thing is pretty cool. Definitely a nice purchase, in my opinion. So overall, out of everything, I would probably give this purchase like a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10. And I think it was worth it. You know, I think it was money well spent. I mean, I probably won't use this thing to its full potential, but for me, it was more of a lifelong investment. So I plan on keeping this table for a very long time. So I'll keep it oiled down, keep it looking nice and neat, and you know, I'll make my money back over time with it, I think. So I mean, I think it was worth it. Do I want to do it again? Absolutely not. Primarily just because of the shipping aspect of it with the lack of communications. But if you are in the market for a welding table, this is definitely one that I would have you consider if you have the patience and the time frame to do so. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. I'll try to get back to them when I can. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I answered a bunch of questions for you. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I appreciate it. Thank you for stopping by. Catch you guys later.